All right, welcome. So, as future accountants and business leaders, you're trained to be absolute masters of the balance sheet and the income statement, right? That's the story of what a company has already done. But what about the story of what it's going to do? See, the biggest risks and opportunities, they're not always buried in the ledger. They're out there, in the world. And today, we're going to dive into the essential frameworks you need to analyze that world and really help write a company's future.
When you boil it all down, business strategy is really about closing one fundamental gap. It's the gap between where a company is right now, its current reality, its processes, all its limitations, and where it wants to be in the future. It's that simple. It's about getting from the as is to the to be. So, how do you bridge that divide? Well, the crucial first step is a technique called gap analysis. And this is the tool that turns some vague desire, like, hey, we want to be more innovative, into an actual, concrete plan. It forces you to ask the hard questions. What are we actually missing? What capabilities, what resources, what processes do we need to build to get from here to there? Okay, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll scan the outside world. Then we'll look inward at a company's unique strengths. After that, we'll connect strategy to action and then wrap up with some lessons from the giants. Let's get into it. All right, first up, scanning the outside world. Think of this as pulling out the analyst's telescope. See, you just can't operate in a vacuum. Your first job is always to look outward, to really get a handle on the terrain your business is competing on. And the first tool we're going to grab is the PESTLE framework. It's kind of like a wide-angle lens for your telescope. It helps you systematically scan for all those big macro forces, political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. These are the huge waves shaping the entire business landscape, and they're completely outside of any single company's control. And this is where strategy gets really interesting, because these external factors, they create massive, massive opportunities and threats. Just think about Netflix. They didn't invent high-speed internet, right? Of course not. But they were absolutely brilliant at spotting that external technological shift and then building a multi-billion-dollar empire right on top of it. So, if PESTLE is the wide-angle lens, think of Porter's five forces as the zoom lens. It lets you zero in on a specific industry to figure out basically how profitable it can be. These five forces, things like the power of your suppliers or the threat of new competitors, they literally dictate the rules of the game. It explains why some industries are just natural moneymakers, and why others, like, say, the airline industry, are in a constant dogfight just to keep their margins. Okay, on to section 2, analyzing from within. So, we've mapped the external world with our telescope. The next critical step is to put that down and pick up the analyst's mirror. It's time to take a hard, honest look at the company itself. And this is a huge pivot point in the whole analysis. We're shifting the question from what might we do based on all those opportunities out there to what can we realistically do with the stuff we actually have right now. So how do we do that? We use something called the VRIO framework. Think of it as a brutal audit for a true competitive advantage. It asks 4 questions. Is your resource valuable? Is it rare? Is it super hard to imitate? But that last one, that's the kicker. Is the company actually organized to capture its value? If you can check all 4 boxes, boom, you've got a sustained competitive advantage. And for all you accounting folks, think of it this way. It's probably the most valuable asset a company has that you will never, ever see on the balance sheet. And this brings us to an absolutely crucial point, one you've probably heard before. Even a perfect VRIO-tested resource is totally useless if the company's internal culture works against it. Culture is that invisible force that decides whether a brilliant plan on paper actually happens or if it just falls apart the second it hits the real world. So how do you make this invisible force visible? Well, a fantastic tool for this is the cultural web. It helps you diagnose a company's culture by looking at real things, like the stories people tell, the daily routines, and, this one's huge, the control systems. What actually gets measured and rewarded around here? Because that's what uncovers what a company truly values. And believe me, it's often way different from what's written in the glossy mission statement. Okay, section 3, aligning strategy and action. So we've looked outside, we've looked inside. Now what? Now we need the analyst's blueprint. This is all about building that bridge from the big, lofty ideas down to concrete, measurable actions that every single person in the organization can actually follow. And the classic tool for this is the balanced scorecard. Now, this thing is so powerful because it forces leaders to look beyond just the financial bottom line. It measures performance across 4 key areas. And here's why that matters, especially for you guys. Financial results are lagging indicators. They tell you what happened. They're the final outcome of how well you served your customers, how good your processes were, and how much you invested in your own people. What this does is create this beautiful, clear cause and effect chain. People call it a strategy map. And the logic just flows right up the chain. You invest in your employees' skills, that's learning and growth. That leads to better, more efficient internal processes. Better processes mean happier customers. And what do happier customers do? They drive better financial results. You can literally trace a golden thread from something like a single training program all the way to the bottom line. It's brilliant. All right, section 4. Let's look at some lessons from the giants. It's time to see how all these frameworks actually play out in the real world, with a couple of companies that have absolutely mastered this strategic journey. I mean, Netflix is just a masterclass in this stuff. They used Pestle to spot the coming broadband wave. They used Porter's 5 forces to see their biggest weakness, how much power the content studios had over them. So what did they do? They neutralized that threat by becoming a supplier themselves with Netflix originals. And then they built their VRO-tested secret sauce, that inimitable recommendation algorithm that keeps us all glued to the screen. Then you've got Starbucks. They show the incredible power of deep customer analysis. I mean, think about mobile order and pay. That was built specifically for the time-crunched morning commuter. Brilliant. But they also give us a huge cautionary tale. Their initial spectacular failure in Australia is a perfect example of what happens when you ignore the external environment. It proves that even the strongest brands can get derailed if they don't pay attention to local culture. And this all comes back to one single critical point. What's the number one reason huge corporate strategies like mergers and acquisitions fail? It's not a flaw in the financial model. It's not a mistake on a spreadsheet. It is a clash of internal cultures. Getting that cultural analysis right isn't just a nice to have, it is absolutely non-negotiable for success. So let's bring this all home. After this whole journey from the big wide world all the way down into a company's inner workings, what are the key things you need to take away from this? Here's your strategic checklist, your 4 foundational rules. First, context is king. You never ever define a solution without understanding the macro environment. Second, always remember, culture eats strategy. A perfect plan on paper will get torched if it ignores the organization's cultural web. Third, traceability is mandatory. Every single project, every dollar spent has to trace back to a strategic objective. And finally, remember, this is dynamic. The world is always changing, so this analysis is a continuous process, not a one-and-done report. Get these right, and you ensure your decisions are calculated maneuvers, not just hopeful bets. And that, ultimately, is the challenge for you. As future financial professionals, your reports tell the perfect, precise story of what has already happened. But by mastering these frameworks, you get something more. You get the power to not just record the past, but to truly analyze the present and help write the story of what happens next.